everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Everyday Defender podcast. My name is Koos, and I'm joined here once again with my friend from Down Under, Chris. Hi, Chris. How are you doing?
Hey, Koos. Great to see you, man. It's always great. It's like my favorite part of the month when I get to sit down and do this recording with you. So yeah, great to see you.
Well, from the looks of it, you're not in Sydney right now, right?
Yeah, no, I'm not in my regular dungeon. I'm actually in Brisbane at the moment, so just a little bit up the north coast of Australia. Well, I guess north from Sydney, up the coast. Yeah, I'm working with a customer over here for the week, so I didn't want to stall or delay the recording, so I've got a little makeshift recording studio here with like the furniture being rearranged and whatnot so that I could actually sit down and
That's
have some sort of decent light. Yeah, that's right. I was hoping for a little bit more, hoping for some more sunshine as well, but for some reason it just started raining this afternoon, so that's why it's also like dark. Oh. But hey, what can you do? Roll with the punches.
At least you don't have snow over there in wintertime, so here it's much worse. Well, we have a nice summer still, actually.
Yeah, you guys have been having some pretty good weather over there in Europe, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit too good at some places. We had some very high heat, and even in the south of Europe, there are some problems with some fires going on in forests and everything. So it's that's not very good. So it's very hot in the south, over 40 degrees, 45 degrees, or something like that. MVP renewal week obviously was last week. Sorry everybody for your LinkedIn feed being spammed with all the updates. And to my surprise, I gained an additional category, which is the identity and access category. So apparently I talked way too much about Entra and passkeys in the past. So Microsoft awarded me a second category. And I thought let's stick to it and let's talk about Entra ID B2C and external ID today, since I was working with that recently for a client. And you, Chris, you're going to talk about patch management, am I right?
Yeah, patch management. But yeah, firstly, congrats on the renewal, mate. I do firmly believe that you're one of the most deserving MVPs in the community. You really do work very, very hard for those renewals. So, congrats on that coming through for you. And talking about patch management and vulnerability management and all this stuff, I think it's very topical at the moment. There's obviously a lot going on when it comes to patching and patches, and we've been saying for a while, to everyone, like patch your stuff, right? But I wanted to kind of break into some of the nuances of that and some of the confusion that I see. Something I've been working on myself with my current customer a fair bit as well. So hopefully it'll be a fun topic. It's going to be a little bit more sort of theory today. When I was putting the notes together for this, I realized that there's so much you could dig into when you start talking about the technology and everything behind it. So I figured today we'll just sort of crack it open and just talk a little bit about the theory and the actual define what we're talking about, and then possibly as a follow on or a part two, we'll dig into maybe the tech and the technology behind it. Watch the space.
Already a little bit of a spoiler going on there. Well, it's an important topic, and I think underlooked very much still in practice.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, so I recently had to help a customer get their Entra ID B2C, business to consumer tenant, connected to our SOC, actually. And I knew what a B2C was and where it lived when I did my Azure exams in the early days, for example. But I never really needed to interact with it before. And now I needed to look into how I'm going to connect it to the SOC. And I discovered that B2C was also now replaced by external ID, different product name. And I thought it was a good idea because I found some challenges that it's a little bit finicky here and there setting things up. There are some pros and cons to each. So I thought it would be an interesting topic to bring along for today's episode. So first of all, what is B2C? If people do not know it, it's what Microsoft call Customer Identity and Access Management Platform, or CAM. This is introduced in 2016 already, so it is old. So it was part of my early Azure exams, I guess, back in the day. And it's meant for identities outside of your organization. So your customers signing into your web shop, perhaps if you're a government running some government services, maybe perhaps even citizens using some government portal, or partners using your applications, that kind of thing. So identities you don't want to bring into your workforce tenant for your employees and want to separate off in a separate container, so to speak. And in the past, it was even possible to connect third-party services like Google and LinkedIn and Facebook, so people could bring in their own virtual identities and authenticate to your applications, etc. And then Microsoft introduced in 2023 the next generation of B2C, and that's when they called it External ID. They did not rename B2C. It was actually a new product introduced in 2023, and I believe it became general available in 2024. I believe, from top of my head. So for the B2C scenario, just like B2C, you create an external tenant. So B2C went a little bit differently, but the external ID has a very similar look and feel to what you're used to with the Entra portal, with the Entra page. So it looks like an additional tenant in your organization, but since it's an external tenant instead of a workforce tenant, there are some buttons which do not work, and there are some limitations, and that is where the finicky part gets in as well. Have you worked with B2C, Chris, or External
I
ID?
Yeah, I've worked with B2C back in the day. I did some work with the scenario that we worked on was with a school, right? So they had a directory. Their Entra was, which is where their sort of faculty or the teachers and students lived, and then they also needed identities for the parents, so the parents would live in the B2C tenant.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, it was complicated stuff, man. Just even provisioning and all of those workflows, you had to really write a lot of your own or customize your own stuff there. There wasn't a lot of stuff out of the box, so I've not worked with the external ID part of it or the new version of it. So keen to hear your findings here and you know what you come up with.
Yeah, so since I have a lot of discussions with clients who want to onboard our managed detection and response services, and they come up with all kinds of things that are important to them, and they want to bring them into our services. And sometimes we have to figure out some custom log ingestion stuff for it. But it was actually the first time a large customer came with a B2C offering to us and wanted to connect that as well. And it makes sense, right, in theory, because the tenant handles sign-ins to their customer-facing applications. So if somebody's trying to abuse accounts over there, or I don't know, reset a password or something, you want to know of this in the SOC. So it makes sense from a security standpoint that the customer is really wanting to protect the identity part of their applications. The problem with B2C, however, is, well, first of all, I cannot enroll it anymore. So when I first heard about this, I was like, okay, let's set it up and try figure out how it all works. You cannot do that anymore. Since external ID has replaced it, B2C is still working, and I believe it is retiring. Yeah, so support will be there until 2030. So customers running B2C still have some time, but eventually they need to migrate to external ID. But the problem is with this customer, they weren't able to migrate just yet due to some custom workflow stuff going on. More on that later. So they asked me, well, we're sticking with B2C for now, so just see if we can make it happen. But another problem was with B2C is that Microsoft recently in March this year, stripped a lot of the security features out of B2C. So in the past, your B2C environment was could be protected with P2 security features, just like your workforce tenant. So all of the identity protection features were there, but Microsoft stripped them down in March to, well, I don't know, maybe even force companies to migrate to external ID eventually. But the thing is, because you don't have any insights like the risky users, risky sign-ins, for example, and in conjunction with conditional access, you could say if a user appears to be risky based on Microsoft telemetry and everything, you could determine if a user is risky, we don't want to allow them on the application, for example. You couldn't do that any longer because the features were stripped down. So I looked into this, and yes, you can connect your sign-in logs and audit logs from B2C to Sentinel, and then you can create some kind of detections. But obviously, with KQL queries, you aren't able to replicate the full set of identity protection functionality. So the added security benefit is relatively slim, in my opinion. So yeah, so I had a discussion with the customer about this. It might be interesting anyway to do at least do some form of identity-based use cases on those logs from B2C. But eventually, I would always advise to look into the path of migrating to external ID. The thing is, however, external ID looks like the successor of B2C. So I was actually assuming that all the P2 security features were back and live again in external ID. But that's not the full story, unfortunately. So Microsoft did bring a lot of security features in external ID. So now you can also leverage passkeys, for example, which is obviously a great addition. But the risk state, the risk determination, the identity protection stuff, it's still not there. So it's still stripped. And well, I'm not sure if it's coming back eventually. Doesn't look like it. So that's actually a shame. So that was actually a very powerful thing you can do. But like I said, with passkeys and conditional access, you can even enforce some very stricter MFA to your external ID users, much more so that you could do with B2C. Let me see. So the only thing I encountered next is when you wanted to connect the logs from B2C or external ID, it works the same matter actually. You have to connect your diagnostic settings to a log analytics workspace, right? Running Sentinel. But the thing is, a B2C or an external ID tenant cannot have an Azure subscription attached to it. So that external tenant is a separate entity. You can actually go into the tenant switcher in your Azure portal or your Entra portal and switch to the external ID tenant. But from there, you're unable to connect any Azure subscription. So you wouldn't be able to deploy a log analytics workspace to select as a target for the logs. And the way Microsoft worked around this is by leveraging Azure Lighthouse. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, Chris,
Yeah.
Azure Lighthouse?
Yep.
Yeah, so we use this as well in our services where you delegate permissions from one tenant on Azure resources in another tenant. So Microsoft leverages Azure Lighthouse as part of an onboarding wizard. So when you go into the external ID tenant for the first time, you're greeted with a wizard asking you to set up a couple of things. So one of the things is it asks if you want to send some logs somewhere. And when you just go through that wizard, you'll eventually encounter an option to send it to Log Analytics Workspace. It will automatically provision a resource group, a workspace, and the Azure Lighthouse delegation to get access on that to store the logs. But it all happens in one sweep, and in the end, yeah, you have a separate workspace. But in my case, I wanted to use an existing workspace already containing my analytic rules and my other sign-in logs. And there wasn't an option to do that because obviously in the pull-down menu, I couldn't select any other workspaces because they weren't there. And there was no delegation set up to the other resource groups. So when people encountering this and hearing this, you have to set up an Azure Lighthouse delegation beforehand or afterwards manually and delegate permissions to your resource group containing your Sentinel workspace with the external ID tenant. And then when you go into a wizard, then you can actually select that existing workspace from the pull-down menu and it will skip all the other steps. The thing is, however, if you completed the wizard, I had a very hard time to find that wizard again. For some reason, it's buried somewhere in the menus. I put it in the show notes where you can find it. So it took me a while to figure that out. Since I already completed it the first time and then wanted to correct it afterwards, I made things a little bit harder. So that's why I thought I bring it up this week. And then eventually when you have your logs, your sign-in logs and your audit logs into Sentinel, they look very similar to the things you're used to from your workforce tenant. And you can apply detections on that, like maybe some brute force attempts or maybe some MFA abuse or maybe some changes to accounts being done. But again, it's still not P2 identity protection. So I think you still should also look into enforcing passkeys or some proper MFA for those external users as well. However, the problem, migrating from B2C to external ID isn't that easy. And this customer already brought it up in one of my first conversations with them. It has something to do with the identity experience framework, some kind of XML policy stuff going on into B2C. Maybe this rings a bell with you, Chris, when you set it up. Oh, no. Okay. Well, since
No.
you mentioned it, it was kind of hard to set it up B2C in the early days. Apparently, there's a lot of custom stuff you can do, which you cannot do any longer with external ID. And you have to figure out some new custom authentication extensions instead of that. And that was actually the reason why this customer is a little bit blocked on migrating right away. And then even if you want to migrate, it's not a simple toggle, unfortunately. It never is, I guess, where you can just migrate into external ID. You actually have to set up your external ID separately from your B2C. You have to take an inventory first of all your applications, your user flows, your identity providers, everything. Then obviously you have to create all your users into the external ID. There's no way to sync password hashes to the external ID. So you have two options. You either ask everybody to reset their password once they land on the external ID, or there is actually a quite clever password hash harvesting workflow thing available. I'll put a link in the show notes, but this is where your app connecting to B2C and external ID is able to, if your user is successfully logging in from B2C, it is actually capturing the hash and storing it through Graph in the external ID for the same user. So if you have it running in parallel for a while, you'll probably bring over most of the frequently used accounts automatically that way. So it's quite involved, unfortunately, and there are some challenges with it. But I think if you're listening and you're using B2C, please consider looking at external ID because of the security features and the fact that B2C will be end of support in 2030.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting process and journey for a lot of orgs, right? Because if you think about the BTC use cases, it's usually, it's almost always unmanaged identities from consumers or outside parties, right?
Yeah.
Makes it really, really difficult if you've gone and invested time into building something like this, and then now you've got to, do stuff or change stuff, right? It's definitely an interesting one for sure.
Yeah, and I also had some conversations with the customer that maybe not relying only on protecting these identities is the proper way to do, because like you said, it is out of your control, right? So those customers have their own identities. They log in from their own endpoints, not managed by your organization. They're coming from Tor browsers or VPNs or all over the world, whatever. So I think you should assume that everything that's landing on your front door could be potentially problematic. So enforcing a proper MFA would be one thing, but the second thing obviously would be also to protect the workloads in the backend. And obviously with Defender for Cloud, with Defender for Containers, with storage, with app security, you have a lot of ways, databases, you have a lot of ways to protect the front end and the back end services. And I think that's perhaps even more important than focusing solely on these identities, to be honest. There's a reason, obviously, why you split them up from your workforce tenant in the first place. So maybe just leave it there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it was quite a journey figuring out, especially because B2C wasn't able to get recreated nowadays anymore. So it was a little bit touching around in the dark here and there. But it was a fun project. The lighthouse stuff and the wizard got me off board a little bit, off guard a little bit. But eventually we managed to solve it, and I learned a thing or two, so that's always good.
I think I still have a BTC tenant or directory kicking around in my tenant because of the work that I had previously done. But you're right, like it's always difficult when you've got to try and replicate something so you can come up with a solution, but you can't actually build the thing.
Yeah.
So always challenging. But it sounds like it was a fun experience and something interesting to learn for sure. I noticed you've got a ton of links in the show notes again, which is really cool. So, folks can kind of find more detailed information anyway.
Indeed. I didn't want to go into all the weeds of the stuff and all the migrating. So I put a bunch of links in there. And I hope it's informative for people listening, running B2C.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you for sharing that. I think
Yeah,
I'm sure
welcome.
there are some folks out there with that are going to run into this at some point. So very cool.
Yeah, and like I said, especially the whole lighthouse, the wizard thing, it was kind of weird. So I hope people hearing this they don't stumble upon the same issues as I did. So.
Yeah, fair enough.
So
Yeah,
on to
another
your
thing
topic,
that
Chris. We're patching. We need to patch our stuff. Is that right?
we need
Didn't
to
know
patch our
that.
stuff. And I was going to say another thing that should be topical for folks, or top of mind for folks, is patching. And I think we've definitely mentioned it before, talking about patching things, making sure things are updated. And I understand that that's not always as easy as just auto updating things, right? Especially when your organization gets larger, becomes a little bit more difficult to automatically deploy massive amounts of patches to things. Software can be nuanced. Different folks use different software. You patch one thing, you break something else. All of these things, they happen in large environments, right? But I think that we're in a place now where attackers are getting so good at reverse engineering patches and CVEs and stuff that we can't be lagging so far behind that patching cycle. I mean, I don't know, if you've worked, I imagine you did work in large environments back in the day when patches hit. There was a test environment, and you take weeks to go from the patch actually becoming available, putting it in the test environment, having people test it, report, blah 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 blah, before you eventually would push that patch into production. We
Yeah,
can't
it's
do
a
that
big
anymore,
problem.
right?
You can't do that in nowadays any longer.
You're almost better off breaking things in the production environment, but getting the patches out there. And I'm not saying go and do this. I'm just saying you're almost better off because you can't rely on it, right? So if you haven't been following along, I have some stats here from, this is just Microsoft Patch Tuesday for the last couple of months, right? So in June, we set a record with 198 CVEs that were patched across Microsoft Patch Tuesday. 32 of those were critical, and at the time, which is June of 2026, that was the largest release of patches in the history of Microsoft Update patching program, right? The previous record was, I think, from sometime in October 2025. Now, fast forward, this was June. Fast forward to July, which was last week. We had Patch Tuesday for July. And again, that record was broken. This time, more than 600 CVEs were patched, 60 critical vulnerabilities. There were 3 0 days, of which 2 of them were actively being exploited, right? And I think one was ADFS thing, and there was something on SharePoint as well. And there were actively exploited privilege escalation vulnerabilities. So we're seeing this sort of avalanche of updates and patches. And the reason behind it is maybe quite obvious, and maybe it isn't, but it's because of AI, right? And AI sort of powered vulnerability scanning, right? We've heard, I'm sure we've all heard of Mythos by now, and how amazing Mythos is at finding vulnerabilities. Microsoft obviously have M-Dash, which I guess is what they use for something similar or to do the same thing. But I'm just talking specifically Microsoft here. If you think about that sheer number, 622 CVEs in one patch release, attributed to AI scanning and AI sort of, actively looking at things through the code base, right? Now, the challenge here is that the bad guy also has access to these tools in many instances. And so we've gone from a place where a CVE would happen, the vendor would release a patch, the bad guy would take the patch, reverse engineer it to figure out what the flaw was, and then start attacking the flaw, right? To try and get hold of folks that haven't yet patched. There was a time there, like that time to exploit was fairly long, because they would wait for the patch, they would reverse engineer it, and then they'd try and find targets. Well, we're at a place now where the bad guy has the same tools that the good guys have. They can also scan the code base. They can also look for stuff, right? And look for vulnerabilities. And so you have this like massive narrowing of this sort of time to exploit. And it's a real problem. So given all of this background and all of these things, I kind of wanted to I guess ask the question, right? Is if you're responsible for patching your estate today, let's say you're in the server team or you're in the EUC team and you're responsible for patching your endpoints, how confident are you that those 622 CVEs that were identified and patches were released for last week, how confident are you that all that stuff is patched and up to date today, right?
Yeah.
I would fair to say that a lot of folks are probably scratching their heads going, I might want to go and check that, or maybe I should go run a report. And that's probably the right answer because you want to be sure, right? And one of the things I found over time is that there's a bit of confusion between sort of the concepts of patch management and vulnerability management and sort of where they sit within, I guess, the maturity framework of an organization. And I thought, you know what, it'd be a good idea to kind of lay the foundation, talk about these things, and help folks, I guess, understand where these things sort of sit and play and where they all sort of fit together, right? And if you're not looking at the show notes, I have the classic meme of two Spider-Man pointing fingers at each other. Because to me, that's often how this feels. It's like, well, patch management points at vulnerability management, who's pointing back at patch management, right? So if we break it down just a little bit, so vulnerability management really is that sort of ongoing process where you're identifying and assessing, prioritizing, and remediating these weaknesses, right? It's an ongoing sort of cyclical thing where you're constantly looking at scanning your devices, looking for what vulnerabilities exist, figuring out, whether they are vulnerable or sort of, is it a misconfiguration? Is it an actual CVE? Are there vendor patches available? Things like that. Then you want to sort of prioritize those things and remediate them, and sort of go through this whole sort of process. And why this matters is because, as I said before, the time to exploit keeps shrinking. Right, we're getting to this place now where it's a race between Microsoft and the other vendors and the bad guys to get to the exploit first, because they no longer need to wait for us or wait for the good guys to release patches to be able to reverse engineer them. They can just go and find the exploits themselves, right? Also, there's this we have this real this challenge where in some cases and in many cases we can't patch everything, right? This is a process, and it's a process where we have to look at what we have available. We have to look at prioritizing the things that need to be patched based on how critical they are to our business, not necessarily how critical they are based on a CVSS score, right? So if you're not familiar with the nomenclature, a CVE is essentially the vulnerability database, right? That sort of lists a critical vulnerability. And a CVSS score is the severity of that vulnerability as a score. I believe that score is out of 10. So anything 9.8 and above usually is very bad, right? It's pretty difficult to get a 9.8 or a 9.7, whatever the case is, or a 10 CVSS score. Now, oftentimes what happens in organizations is, and I think we're just human, right? We assume we find a list of 622 vulnerabilities, go and find the ones that are the highest priority based on their CVSS score and go and patch those things. That's a good approach, but that doesn't necessarily always ring true in all the environments, right? Because you may have an environment, for example, that is an OT environment, right, where you run controllers and sort of OT, IoT type devices. That environment may have compensating controls that actually help. So, for example, your OT environment may not have internet access. So a CVSS score of 9.8 in an OT environment that doesn't have internet access may not be as high a priority for you as a CVSS score of 7 or 8 in an internet-facing environment, right? So you kind of have to prioritize these things based on what is relevant to you in your environment and what other controls exist. The other reason, I think the final point of why this is important and why vulnerability management is such an important thing for us is it's about compliance and guaranteed. If you look at frameworks like CIS, or if you're buying cyber insurance, I'm sure pretty much everyone is buying cyber insurance these days. And I don't know if anyone has personally been responsible for purchasing a cyber insurance program. I've been or policy. I've been through that process a couple of times now. The questionnaires that you fill in, can be kind of intimidating, and almost certainly they're always going to ask and they're going to assume that you have some form of vulnerability management process whereby you're managing the vulnerabilities, and you have a process to update things in a way. So an easy way to think about this, right, and the distinction between vulnerability management and patch management is that vulnerability management is that decision layer, right? How do we figure out what's vulnerable, how bad it is, and come up with some sort of determination as to like, what are we going to fix first? What are we going to fix second? What are we going to fix third, right? That sort of decision layer, that's vulnerability management. And typically in a large organization or in a mature organization, that's a cyber function, right? Patch management is the action of actually patching things and remediating things. And we'll talk about it in just a second, where the remediation doesn't have to be necessarily patch it, right? Because patch it may not be an option. There may not be a patch. It's that remediate action which is handed off. And typically that's something where that gets handed off to an IT team or a operational team, which is, under IT, your server team, your EUC team, etc., who actually action that, right? So in essence, your patch management is a component of a holistic vulnerability management program that you have within your organization. And you'll typically find, when I work with customers, you can find this in various forms of maturity, right? Smaller companies, or companies that are just they've just started or they've just built their infrastructure, they're worried about patching. Patching is the thing, right? So that's where you start. Let's make sure we can get everything patched. And as the company sort of matures and their processes mature and they potentially climb the ladder of compliance and all of these other things, what you find is that matures into going from that very tactical, let's find and patch things, to let's build out a framework for ourselves, whereby we're stepping into this vulnerability management arena where we have this process, right? And I've sort of listed what I see the 5 steps of this process to be, and I've listed them sort of in a linear fashion. But if you think about it, it really should be more cyclical in a circle. But you're discovering. You're discovering is your first phase, right? Discover, I've called it, and what that is it's asset discovery and inventory, right? You can't secure something if you don't know about it, right? So you have to actually have some sort of inventory of all of the assets in your estate. What servers have you got? Where do they live? What operating systems are on those servers? What applications are on those servers, right? And similarly with desktops and your client fleet. How many Windows 10 devices have you got? How many Windows 11 devices? What version? You need to have a really
Windows
robust...
XP devices do you got? Have you got?
Yes, hopefully none, but yes, that's exactly right.
Server 2003. Yeah,
that's right. So no, but that's a very good point, right? Because again, if you're a smaller business or a smaller company and you've got 20 employees and all 20 of those employees have laptops that they bring into the office every day, it's really easy to walk around and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 20. Okay, everyone's got a Mac. When you start having 20,000 users, like, it gets really difficult to keep track on stock, right? And just a really random example of this is about a year ago, I did a project with a very large mining company here in Australia. And one of the things we were doing was, it was a separation project where the mining company had sold off a mine asset. So everything at a particular mine was being sort of separated from the rest of the network, right? So we also had to do a very robust sort of asset discovery piece to figure out which assets, software, hardware, everything else belongs to that mine, so that we could separate those assets. And we thought we had done a really good job of figuring out exactly what belonged where, until the day came where, or the week came where we were starting to cut over workstations from one domain to the next. And people would turn up, to the build room, and they'd have like 3 laptops. And we're like, you're according to the asset list, you only have 1 laptop. And we're like, oh, these are my 2 old ones. They were just in my drawer, right? Or folks would go, be off shift for 2 weeks, and the laptop would just sit in the drawer, and then they'd forget about it, or whatever the case may be. So that asset discovery piece can be really difficult. It sounds simple, but it can be really, really difficult.
Yeah.
To keep track of assets, what you have, where they live, and make sure that stuff gets updated, right? If you get a new laptop, you need to make sure that the laptop that was assigned to you before either gets retired or gets updated to the new person who's going to get it, right? So that sort of asset discovery, right? Really, really important. Then the second part of this is assess. So you want to look at actually assessing the vulnerabilities, right? And this is kind of where you run scans and stuff like that. And there are a bunch of tools that you can use that will scan the environment for assessments, and it will query the CVE database to look for vulnerable software and sort of give you the reports around that. Misconfigs, all of those types of things, this kind of shows up in that sort of assessment phase. So then you end up with a list. And if you've ever run a vulnerability scanner in a large environment, I'm sure you understand that you come up with a list and it says, you have 10,000 vulnerabilities, right? Because it will find absolutely everything that is potentially deemed to be vulnerable. And this is where the prioritize phase, which is sort of phase 3 in this process, becomes really important, because this is where you start looking at things and you go, okay, well, we've got 10,000 vulnerabilities. How many of those are things that we need to worry about today? And how many of those are things that we can worry about next week, right? And you have to sort of do that risk-based scoring to understand how do we tackle this problem, because we can't just run after everything. We have to prioritize things that are going to be really important to us. And I talked about the example before of an OT environment, perhaps, where you have compensating controls that may actually mean that the risk of that thing is lower than you may think, right? Or what have you. Or you may find that it's, there's a CVSS of something that's 8 and it's a remote code execution on a product that you have that's internet facing. Well, that thing better shoot up to the top of your list all of a sudden, because you need to get hold of that thing and get it sorted and updated pretty quickly. So that prioritization seems simple, but you need to really spend the time to have the robust rules in place to help you prioritize where you're going to spend your time immediately. What stuff can you afford to spend less time on or do later, or what have you, right? And that's where you sort of hand that off into step 4, which is that remediation. Typically, the folks that run the vulnerability management program are security and governance folks. They're not the tactical people on the ground who are going to go patch machines, who are going to go crawl under desks and find, that one thing that one PostgreSQL server that someone set up 10 years ago and it's been running under a desk. Like, those are not. So you hand this off to your tech team to go and remediate, right? And this is where that sort of happens. And typically, you want to have this be a tracked a request, right? An email that says, "Hey, you've got these risks, go fix them." That's not really a good service management approach, is it? You kind of want to have this be tracked in some sort of request whereby the team has this on their radar and they can go. And then the remediation in itself can be one of 3 things typically, right? You patch it. So, in most cases, if we're talking about the Microsoft approach and Patch Tuesday, there's a patch for it. So the patch already exists. So the easiest thing is go and patch it, right? Or you mitigate it. So again, maybe there isn't a patch, or maybe in order to patch that thing, you have to reboot, I don't know, a nuclear turbine or something, right? Well, you can't go just do that. There's got to be a little bit of a process to it. You may be able to disable a feature, or maybe you isolate that thing on the network, or some sort of workaround until such time that you can patch it. Or maybe you just accept the risk, right? If you have to reboot a controller that runs a turbine, and the downtime of that turbine is going to cost the business $10,000 a minute, is it worth the downtime, right, to fix the risk? Now, this is where risk people and lots of smarter people than me come into play to help sort of make that determination as to like whether we document the risk, accept it, and move on, or whether we pull the trigger and we patch it, right? But that's part of this vulnerability management process that as a business you kind of need to work through. And then the last part of this is just reporting. It's great to say something's been patched because we ran the executable, or we pushed the update in SCCM or Intune or whatever. But you really need to be able to report success on this, right? It has to be reported green. Sometimes a reboot is required again, or there's some reason why the patch doesn't apply or land, or it requires something else, or whatever the case may be. So, you need to follow the process through. And the only way you know about that is by looking at sort of robust reporting to understand that you've verified it, it's been validated, and things are sort of as you intended. So I'm going to kind of leave it there for now. I just wanted to really just define, patch management versus vulnerability management, what these things are, and sort of break down what a typical vulnerability management process looks like, right? And like I said, this is a constant ongoing thing within your business, and it's really important that if you are today still just patching and you're just tactically running after patches, I think the Americans would say whack-a-mole, right? I don't know if you ever know what that is, guys, but the game where when it pops its head out, you whack. That's really what you're doing, is you're playing whack-a-mole, right? If you're just running after patches. And even a small environment can be really, really cumbersome to just to stay ahead when you have that. And we're only talking about Microsoft stuff here now. When you layer in third-party software, right? Think about that. Like, you've got a large organization with third-party software. Where are those packages coming from? Who updates them? How do they get pushed out? How are they deployed in the first place? It can get really, really complicated. And I think probably what I'll end up doing for next episode, or at least for another episode in future, is I'll break down a little bit more some of these phases and look at some of the technology, and maybe some technical processes that you can use. Because the answer isn't always go buy all of Defender, because all of Defender can do some of this stuff, right? There's other ways that you can look at it. There's other tools around as well that complement things that you may have. And if you've got four users working out of coffee shops all day, you're probably not using SCCM, right? You might be using something else. So I'll sort of dig into the technical nuances of this, I think, in a future episode, to talk about some of the technical challenges here. But I think for now, I really wanted to just sort of share something that I've been thinking about a lot, which is, how do we, from a process perspective, govern this, and how does this scale, especially when we have larger organizations where we have lots of assets and lots of things.
Yeah, and you're probably going into this in more detail than in the next episode. But when I look at threat and vulnerability management in Defender, it's a very powerful reporting tool to give you insights in what your organization is doing. And we also for our company, we're frequently assessing those reports monthly with our customers to zoom in on. But even if you patch applications, a lot of applications come with all kinds of packages inside or modules inside which can contain vulnerabilities. And I'm always amazed by, for example, we had a customer last time where they were running thousands of Firefox 1.0 on their endpoints. And what it appears to be, it was part of the installer of some kind of Zebra printer they installed in the logistics department, right? So you have very high, a lot of vulnerabilities going on there while you think you are fully patched. But some kind of third-party supplier brought some malicious, potentially abusable software into your company.
That's a really good example too, because I, my Mac that I use at Arenco is managed through Defender, and we have our SecOps team that kind of looks after that. And I get a report every week, like a vulnerability report that they email me of things that need updating, right? It's sort of like an internal workflow that we have, looking at all of our endpoints. And if you've got stuff that needs updating, aka you haven't been running your updates often enough, then they will alert you. And I received an email telling me about some package on the Mac, and I can't remember what it was, but it was something. I looked at it and I was like, no, I don't have that installed. This must be just be a mistake. So I deleted the email. And then the next week I got the same thing, and I was like, no, and I deleted it. And then the third week I got the same thing, and I eventually pinged one of the SecOps guys on Teams. And I was like, hey man, I'm getting this email telling me about this package that I supposedly have that's vulnerable. I don't know. I've never used this thing in my life. I don't know. I don't have it installed or anything. And we kind of dug into it eventually. And actually, it was Security Copilot that gave us the information. It was a package that was installed as part of another installer. And so it's buried inside the contents of another thing so it doesn't show up in my applications folder. It was buried somewhere else. And that thing, even though the main package wasn't vulnerable or was updated, its reliance on this other thing meant that I was still getting flagged, right? So yeah, it's a tough problem to do, especially when you're at scale, for sure.
Yeah, and when you look at, I think there are two examples that come to mind: Log4j and SolarWinds. Those were very famous for actually being able to be abused in the same way because they were packaged with other software. Actually,
yeah, no, 100%. So
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully this is on folks' mind. I think we are going to continue to have an onslaught of updates for not only for Windows but for everything for the next little while. And if you listen to Steve Gibson and Security Now, I'm a big fan, so I listen to that every week. And Steve has this theory about for the next 6 or 7 months, we're probably going to see very, very high numbers of updates and patching and stuff because of AI. But eventually, we're going to find that AI is going to catch all of the vulnerable software, right? And so things will taper way down again, and we'll be good, and closer to being to a place where software is perfect because AI is starting to write so much of our code, and it's also finding all the vulnerabilities, right? But at least for the next little while, I think until the end of the year or so, we're going to be seeing lots of patches coming thick and fast. And we really need to make sure that we're in a place where we can actually get these things deployed out to our endpoints and our estate very, very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw some recent announcement on M-Dash recently as well. It might be a fun topic to perhaps combine in our next episode to see what Microsoft is doing to bring AI to the table to be more secure on your patch and vulnerability management.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think so. Won't be the first time or the last time that we talk about this for sure. So
yeah. So you brought a very fun community project this month, Chris.
Yeah. I think this one's a little bit of fun this month. So we're not looking at someone's application or GitHub project this month. I've been talking to my friend Micah a fair bit over the last few weeks or few months, and if you don't know Micah's he's a security MVP based. He lives in Seattle, so based out of Seattle, out of the US. And one of the great things about Micah is Micah's always building stuff. Like there's not a time that I bump into Micah or see Micah where he doesn't show me something cool and something awesome. He's always building stuff. His imagination is insane. But anyway, he's been working on this little security. It's like a Microsoft security related quiz game called Who Wants to Be a CISO? It's sort of, he hasn't really announced it yet, but he shared it with me and Nick Blank a week or so ago, and I did speak to him this morning, and he was happy for me to share this, on the recording. But essentially, I think he built it for if you're running a booth or something at a conference and you have a very large screen, you can sort of get people to be interactive with what you're doing. But I think this works really well as like a fun version of Kahoot. I know lots of folks do the Kahoot quizzes as an icebreaker or something where if you're doing a meetup talk or something, we have a big screen and folks are so you have the ability you start this up on a big screen and then players can join with their phone or whatever and sort of answer the quiz questions and stuff. It's so well done. It is incredibly well done. A lot of fun. And because it's Microsoft and topical and sort of built by someone in the community, I thought it'd be a really cool one to share. So I've got a link on it. It's whowantsToBeACISO.com. I think it's .com anyway.
Yeah, it is.
Let me click the link. Yes, whowantsToBeACISO.com. You can play it by yourself too. So if there's a sort of solo player mode if you want to just play it by yourself. But a really fun thing. Just think about it for your next meetup or whatever. The next time you have a large meeting and you want to just break the ice or whatever. It's a really fun one. So
it looks really professional as well.
Oh yeah, no, he's put a lot of time into it, but it's pretty awesome. So
yeah, it's a lot of vibe coding, but also AI generated graphics, I assume, but looks really cool.
Yeah, we had Micah talk to us on the Cloud Architects podcast a few weeks ago, and we had an episode about vibe coding specifically, and we talked about some of the tool sets and the things that platforms that he uses and stuff, and I think this was one of the things that came out of that. So really
Nice.
fun. If you I've linked Micah's LinkedIn as well. He's one of those cool guys in the community that he's always open to being folks to reach out to and connect with. So if you like what he's done, say hi to him, and that was one I wanted to share for this week's community project. I will say on the topic of community projects, I have been working on Connect 365. I know we talked about it a few episodes ago. I've been working on it. I'm really pleased with sort of where it's going and the direction that we're going. So I'm hoping I'm trying to keep myself accountable here. So hopefully by next episode next month, I will be able to share more about the next gen Connect 365 and where we go with that.
Very cool. And I think it's fun to have a community project for a change, which isn't used on our day-to-day basis or highly technical. It's a fun showcase of what AI is bringing us and some positive things as well. And let's link the Cloud Architects episode with Micah talking about this as well in the show notes.
Yeah, good call. We'll do that. Yeah. That episode is live, so we can link that one for sure. Cool.
So then I guess it's time to wrap up again, Chris, don't you think?
Yeah, time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it?
It is. Well, it's 9 a.m. in the morning, so I'm about to start my work day, and I think you're rounding it off there in Brisbane.
Rounding it off in Brisbane. I think I've got a few emails and Teams messages to reply to, but it won't be long now before I go grab some dinner and settle in. So, always good to see you. As I said before, it's my favorite part of the month. So thank you for making the time, and thank you folks for listening. Obviously, as I said, please, if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, please find us on the socials. We are pretty much, LinkedIn is probably the best one, but grab us on LinkedIn or GitHub or anywhere else.
On your podcast platform, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever you're using, we'll pick it up from there as well.
Yeah, very much so. So we're always interested in any sort of comments or suggestions or anything like that. If not, Koos, we'll see you again, next month. And thank you, folks, for listening.
Thanks everybody for listening. Have a great day. Bye-bye.